So we just saw how to pass data into a Blade template. Pretty underwhelming, standard stuff, right? Well, instead of just passing it in with the view helper, we could declare a public property on our component called name, fill it with jelly, and now if we load it in the browser, we see hello jelly, right? So this is actually functionality you get out of the box with standard Blade components in Laravel 7. When you add a public property, it automatically gets passed to the Blade view. So that's pretty handy, but still, we haven't covered anything in Livewire yet. Well, here we go. We're going to talk data binding. Let's create an input element, a simple text element, and let's say that when we type into the text element, so as we type in, we want the name jelly to change as we type. Okay, here's the Livewire magic. We're going to say wire model name, and this is going to tell Livewire on the front end, hey, keep the value of this input element in sync with the backend property called name. Pretty crazy. Refresh. There we go. Right away, that's our first piece of Livewire magic that we've witnessed. As we type, it also updates automatically. How crazy is that? So there's a lot going on behind the scenes to make this work, and you might be thinking a couple myths I want to dispel right away. So when we make a change like this, what in the world is even happening? I'm going to hit the delete key, and now watch the XHR requests in the DevTools. That's just fancy speak for AJAX requests. I delete, and check it out. It sent a full AJAX request to the server. It sent it to this Livewire endpoint that Livewire automatically makes available. And what it does is it hydrates our class. Just for that request, it hydrates it. It said, here's the data to hydrate that name property with, and now here's an action to perform. Sync the input name with the value jelly. So at first, it was jelly blah, blah, blah. We hit the backspace. Now it's synced with the name jelly. Okay, so what is the response of that AJAX request? It's a bunch of other Livewire stuff for security and other things, but here's the most important thing, is this DOM property right here. Livewire renders out that Blade view again and spits it out to the front end. And now the JavaScript portion of Livewire intelligently DOM diffs. It goes through, it walks through the DOM and it goes, okay, here's the input element that's on the page, and here's the input element from the backend in this little AJAX request. Is there anything different? Okay, if there is, I'll change it. Here's the text. Is there anything different? Yes. Okay, I'll update it. If nothing is different, it won't update and it'll just keep going. So this is the core concept to understand when using Livewire. So it's really important to wrap your head around this idea. I'll keep revisiting it as we go. But here's a couple things you might be thinking at this point. You might be thinking, okay, this feels a lot like Vue.js in PHP, which is admittedly pretty cool. I could do vModel in Vue, and I'm doing wire model in Livewire. But then you might think, okay, well, in Vue.js, this type of stuff just happens without an AJAX request instantly. Wouldn't I just use Vue? Wouldn't I prefer to use Vue? And that's a valid train of thought, but it exposes a problem with how you view Livewire. Livewire is not just a PHP version of Vue, it's a framework for making network requests and changing things on the page. If you think about it, let's say that this was a search bar. Like if you wanted to type in and search some eloquent models, you could do that in Vue and do vModel binding with this name input. But every time it changed, you would have to send an AJAX request to the server to re-render, whatever JSON, get the JSON back and re-render the template. Livewire does this lifecycle for you. So it's a really popular pattern that Livewire is a framework for. Let's go to GitHub and just make some interactions on the page and look at the AJAX requests. So here's the XHR requests of this GitHub page. I'm going to hover over this dropdown. Okay, I hovered over it and something happened in the background. It sent an AJAX request, and it fetched all the HTML that's going to be shown inside of this dropdown right when I hovered over it. And it's not JSON or anything like that. It's just HTML. GitHub uses this exact concept all over the place. It's an extremely powerful pattern that when you pair it with simple JavaScript functionality, which we'll get to later, you have an extremely powerful combination with tons of advantages over using something totally JavaScript like Vue or React. For instance, this is completely a PHP template, so we could say string to upper. And now we get hello jelly. And then as we type, it's updated just fully with PHP. Awesome. So let's keep going with this wire model thing. We'll pull our heads out of the innards of Livewire and get back to just the API and how we use it. Okay. So we have hello name. All right, so there's a few things about wire model that are worth knowing. As we're typing, there's a debounce added automatically. In other words, if I type super duper fast, it's not going to send an AJAX request for every keystroke. It's going to wait until my fingers leave the keyboard to then send the request. And this is super helpful so you're not like bogging down your server and tripping over yourself in the UI. This is something that if you were using Vue or React, you'd probably have to implement on your own, add a little debounce function, but Livewire debounces inputs automatically by default. If you want to customize this behavior, you can do .debounce, and then some amount of time. Let's say we do 1,000 milliseconds, which is a second. Refresh, and now as we type, we let our fingers off the keyboard, and 1,000 milliseconds later, it then updates. So you have full control over the debounce mechanism if you care, but generally, you're probably not going to need this. Okay. Another, maybe more advantageous little pattern is let's say that you don't need to make a round trip every time the user's updating an input element. Let's say that you just want to make it after they click away from the input element. So you can add wiremodel.lazy. This is the same as vmodel.lazy in Vue. And now we type, nothing is sent, we click away, and the request gets sent and comes back. Great. All right, so that's the basics of wire model. Let's see what else we can wire model. So you can add wire model to any input element, any input type element like select or text box or text area or anything like that. So let's do this. Let's do checkbox, and we'll wire model this to a new property we'll create called, let's say, loud. Okay, and we'll create this property, public loud equals, and we'll set it to false by default. All right. So then in here we can do, let's do a conditional where if the user checks loud, we scream hello world. We'll add an exclamation point. So to do that, maybe if you're used to Vue.js, you would think of something like v if loud, right? And then you'd think, well, isn't there like a wire if or something? Well, there's not. For any of that type of thing, for looping or conditionally rendering, you just use Blade. So we'll do if loud, add the exclamation point, end if. Okay? Re-render, and now hello jelly. I click and it goes hello jelly. Unclick, there we go. Nice. So we bound data to a checkbox. Let's keep going. You can also bind data to select dropdowns. So we'll add wire model, and let's make this greeting. And then these options will be different greetings. So at first we had hello, but so let's do hello, and now we'll do goodbye and adios. Okay. Now we'll add that property, public greeting equals hello for the first one. Okay. Refresh, and we change, but nothing happens because we didn't actually tell it to. So it's statically saying hello. Let's make that dynamic with Blade and just echo out greeting. Now when we change hello to goodbye, it says goodbye jelly. And if we make it loud, goodbye jelly. And if we say Caleb, it says goodbye Caleb. There we go. Lots of dynamicism, and we're still staying in PHP. Pretty cool. So let's take this one step further and do this a multiple select dropdown. So when you bind to a multiple select, it's going to make your data an array because you can select multiple. So let's wrap hello in an array. Okay, great. And now our greeting, because greeting is an array, it's going to yell at us about echoing out greeting. So let's implode this. We'll say take the array and concatenate it with commas and spaces. All right. Now we refresh and we get hello jelly. But if we select 2, we get hello goodbye jelly, hello goodbye adios, goodbye adios, jelly, exclamation point, Mon, Caleb, whatever. There you go. So that is the basics of data binding and a basic understanding of how it works under the hood and a few of those implications.